Hello, I hope you're well and warm during this lockdown. It's just begun snowing here in Bristol. My name's Jonathan James and I'm about to speak to you about modernism. It's a period that I have a particular connection to. I just love the music that came out of these 45 or so years. So it's quite a small period between 1890 and 1835. After that, in musical historical terms, we have both the avant-garde and postmodernism. So it's quite a narrow view of what modernism is, but it encompasses within those 45 or so years so many different ideas. It's crazy. You know, in the world of arts, we've got this ferment, haven't we, of isms, so going from expressionism through to Dadaism, surrealism, cubism, fauvism, whatever you've got ism, you know, it's just this explosion of ideas coming together and internationally, all cross-fertilizing each other. The same will be true of music. You know, the composers will be feeding off each other's ideas and it's going to be so intense. You know, there's so many radical innovations within this short time frame that befits the time, really, because, of course, on the eve of a millennium, you're going to have that mixture of feeling excited about the future and, no doubt, trepidation and angst. I mean, just remember how you felt in 1999, you know. On the one hand, we thought, great, where's the internet going to take us? You know, what a fascinating, brave new world of technology that awaits us. And then in the very same breath we're thinking, yeah, but what if it all crashes, you know, at the stroke of midnight? What if the planes fall out of the sky? Do you remember that? Very much the same mix of emotions and of both hope and angst going on at the eve of the 20th century. So where should we start? I could start in the world of literature, because really people like Baudelaire and Strindberg and Rimbaud began to loosen the edges of meaning. And with them and with their poetry and with their theatrical work, language was getting slipperier, if that's a word. And that was reflected in music. Let's turn to Wagner. And those of you who know anything about musical modernism know I couldn't do a talk without mentioning that chord, right? Which is the so-called Tristan chord. It comes up right in the first bar of his prelude to Tristan and Isolde, an opera about both requited but also mainly unrequited love and how you express that in the music. So how does he do it? Let's see if my iPad will play ball. And let me just bring up this wonderful score for you. That in microcosm, by the way, just expresses ambiguity, okay? In that it doesn't lead anywhere in particular. You know, that might, you know, take us to there, but there, I don't know, it could go in many, many different directions, and that's part of the point and part of the joy of it. Okay, so let me just pull this up. It's a wonderful score. By the way, langsam, slow, und, and get ready for this, schmachtend. Schmachtend. What a brilliant German word. Something about languidity. Is that a word? It's languid anyway. So we have an accent here, which is important. And now we want it to do there, right? Because we're programmed towards resolution in our ears. But it doesn't. It just stops with a seventh chord, which is a musical question mark. Fair enough. So we expect resolution then in the next phrase. Do we get it? It goes up. Another seventh chord. That's rather cheeky. So staving off resolution. And this is the language of yearning. Let me remind you, the language of eros. So it's all about that heady anticipation. It's not about arrival. It's about just, the journey to that point. Now, third phrase, that's a forte accent, so even stronger. Another seventh chord, another question. Now we've got that question in mind, so it gets repeated. And then just the final word from that, just questioning with a sense of yearning. And then is what we're expecting, right? Hallelujah! Third line, it's taken there. But, needless to say, he doesn't do that. Isn't that beautiful? Just sidestepping into a new colour there. And it's important we start speaking about harmony as colours here, because not only is it expressing yearning and tension and unresolved tension, but it's also been chosen just by the delight in the new colours that are created by every chord selection. So that we have this sense of, whereas before, in the Romantic period, we might have a sense of gravity, that one chord leads to the next, which leads to the next. 2, 5, 1, that's functional harmony. This is non-functional harmony. This is chromatic harmony, where you don't have a sense of home. And so you could just do that because it feels good. And I don't know, I'm going to go in unexpected places. Where's the home key? Who cares? I've just had a succession of sensual colours, and that's enough. So Debussy would take that Wagnerian idea to a different level within his orchestral work as well as his piano work. But the one I'm thinking of, can you guess? Prelude à l'après-midi d'un faune. Now, this again is a deeply erotic work. So again, the harmonies are going to have to express yearning. And so we're going to get this delicious ambiguity in the language. Let me just turn to that for you. A quick check on the history here. And if you're expecting, by the way, in this talk, for me just to have a neat linear line, it's going to be more modern than that, or more modernist. I'm going to do this with harmony and colour and go back to where I started, chronologically speaking. And then we're going to do another little round of travel with the idea of rhythm, which is quite fun. Expect some African drums and jazz, by the way, just to give you a quick teaser. And then at the end, I'm going to go back and we're going to look at the world of style and stylistic choice. So 3 main themes: colour, rhythm and style. Okay, so let me just give you some context. That Tristan and Isolde Prelude is from 1859, okay? Let's go now to the Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune by Debussy. Starts on a C sharp in the flute. C sharp, by the way, apparently for a flute player is particularly flexible, which is very appropriate. So the first bit of that language is that chromatic slip. We're on very shifting sands already, aren't we? And then that interval on which that first phrase is based, a tritone, a wonderful sense of ambiguity, followed by a stretch which feels as if it is in that key, right? But it isn't. It goes from that sense of possible certainty immediately into a minor 6th chord. Oh, that's so French, isn't it? That minor 6th. It's a C sharp minor 6th. Why am I telling you that? Because we go from a sharp key into this. And then back. So from a sharp key into a flat key. That was B flat. Even without me spelling the different chords, I'm hoping you're getting a different, temperature from the two worlds there. It's deliberately ambiguous, isn't it? And fluctuating to, I suppose, evoke what was going on in the poem on which this piece was based. It's a poem by Stéphane Mallarmé about the erotic daydreams of a faun, and it exists in that twilight zone between sort of a mythological world and something of dream and utter fantasy. So how do you evoke that in music? By having harmonies that are beautifully colourful and evocative, but also very unstable. And that's what Debussy achieves throughout this. There are a few moments of arrival where you sense, oh yeah, I'm in a certain harmonic centre here. But generally speaking, we go between a kaleidoscope of different harmonic colours. Every time you hear that flute solo, it has a different harmonisation beneath it. So just over the page, I've got, an E major sixth chord, which is really soft and gooey and less shady than what we've had before. So listen out for that, particularly in its orchestral version, which is remarkable for just the colour and the imagination in the orchestration alone. So that was 1894, a generation after Tristan and Isolde, and it caused a furore, needless to say. All of these innovative pieces will at the time of their release, and it was seen as a benchmark in the world of modern orchestral repertoire. Where do we go after that in the trajectory of the development of colour? Well, I'm going to come to that name, Arnold Schoenberg. Does that strike a chord of fear within you? I hope not, because actually quite a lot of his earlier work, for which he wanted to be remembered, by the way, was expressionist. So it occupied a very sort of chromatic world, but not an atonal world. You know, he didn't like the word atonal. He said talking of his music as if it were atonal is rather like saying that the act of swimming is just not drowning, just a mere sort of survival technique, not a deeply worked out craft. And so his contribution really to the world of harmony was later on in 1930s and beyond, was to systematise an approach which allowed a new kind of hierarchy into the harmonic choices. It was the 12-tone or dodecaphonic method. And I suppose that is the method for which he is best known. But let's not forget what came before that, which is very deeply felt emotional music, typical of the expressionist tradition, right? Going deep into the psyche and spilling it out onto the musical instruments. I want to go to a particular moment in his second string quartet, which is seen by many as being this transitional moment where he just stretched the elastic so much within the harmonic constraints that we break into a new world completely. He called it total chromaticism, and there's no sense of home whatsoever. So if you thought the Debussy was quite fluid, well, you ain't heard nothing yet. Let me just find this and just play you a little bit of what's happening within the string quartet. Now, this is entitled Rapture. It's a good name for the finale of this string quartet, Entrücken. And the words, famously, that the soprano sings, are you lost? What's the soprano doing in a string quartet? Well, that is one of his innovations, right? He brings in a soprano, which is a lovely touch in and of itself. What she's singing here is, I feel an air from another planet. Ich fühle Luft von anderen Planeten. And later on, very significantly, she's going to say the words, Ich löse mich, I dissolve myself, I lose myself, in a sense, in tones, I'm lost in tones. Kreisend, circling, webend, weaving, So, of course, the harmonic language that goes with that is going to be very, very exploratory. We have here this strange planet, again with a squeak of my pedal, which is adding an interesting mechanical colour. Let's just pause of that. That chord in and of itself, high up on the violins, is so dreamlike, isn't it? And this is where the soprano comes in. Ich fühle Luft. Could linger over what's happening there But the point is that we should just feel alienated in a fascinating way, brought into a fantastic new world, not just the music, but what's being evoked here in the words. So, String Quartet number 2, the finale, marked a turning point in the world of harmony and an important benchmark in this modernist project. After this, we had permission, I say we, I mean the composers of the time had permission to just break free from any sense of constraints, you know? So, let's just look at the world of rhythm now. I'm going to go back, so we've got as far with that as 1907, that string quartet. I'm going to go back to 1897 now, just at the cusp of the turn of the century, to a rather eccentric gentleman, Eric Satie. Very, very colourful guy, and fascinating to read his biography. Don't have time for it now. But he innovated within rhythm by saying, who needs bar lines? You know? Wouldn't it be great just to have utter freedom? I mean, basically, these modern musicians were freedom fighters, all of them in their way, looking for new freedoms within music and saying, you know, let's question the inherited concepts. Let's be sceptical to everything that we've received so far and see whether we can't express things in radical new ways. So within the world of rhythm, and let me just bring up Satie's cold pieces here, so-called dance, crossed up dance, whatever that is. You know, it's very ludic and playful, and typically, what's this? Cheeky, maybe? You know, provocative. Provocative is the word for Satie. What we've got here is, as I say, no bar lines. Let me just show you this. Can you see that? I don't know. And basically, I'm just flowing here. I could be really free with the timing here. There's nothing to say I have to play it metronomically, and there's no sense of phrasing going on, apart from huge long phrases that go on for notes and notes and notes. So that was one step into rhythmic freedom, to go barless. What else can you do? Well, that was 1897. Let's now turn to the world of Charles Ives, another eccentric. And it's important to say 1908 here, because this is when he composed the Unanswered Question. And it's important because he was really innovating within the world of rhythm before Stravinsky and Prokofiev and others were. It's just that he wasn't quite as much in the limelight. Do you know the Unanswered Question? If you don't, you're in for a treat. It's a mystical, philosophical piece that lasts about 6 or 7 minutes. And it's built on 3 different temporal planes. And all of this is written into the prologue that the composer himself writes. So it's very clear what everything symbolises. And what we've got here, first of all, as an underlay, is a sense of timelessness. That's your first temporal plane here, just stillness, which is a G major chord spelt like this, just on strings over 4 different string lines, beautifully stretched out, isn't it? And they move really, really slowly, almost with an imperceptible pulse, you know. A gentle dissonance there. Just beautiful dissonances, but essentially that string part stays within a world of G major, unalloyed, critically without any sudden movements, just drifting. And they are the silence of the Druids, is what he says, this mystical presence that will just be there behind a veil of time. Then we get the question. Remember, the piece is called The Unanswered Question, so you know where this is going to go. The question is going to be asked by a trumpet, often set off stage. Pretty free in itself, and what are we doing here on earth? You know, what's the meaning of existence? Is really what's going on. So that language here is basically taking it. You know, it's built on a diminished chord, which has a sense of angst just built into it. So. And it's answered then by something that, again, is on a different temporal plane. And these are the woodwinds, often played by 4 flutes. And they start, in their first answer, they're quite mystical. Like that. But by the time we get to the end, they get more and more agitated. Why? Because they don't know the answer to existence, even though the trumpet is just stating that question again and again in a more resolute way each time. They just end up by going, you know, completely bonkers writing, you know, marked con fuoco, with that real sense of agitation. What is the meaning of life? What is the answer to the question? And nobody knows apart from the Druids beneath, and they just stick on a lovely G major chord that just disappears into timelessness at the end, fades into nothing. So that is an example of temporal collage, and you could call it polymetric because there are different meters happening at the same time, and it requires great freedom and imagination from the players. And you can imagine how shocking that would have been both to the ear and also to the players to be confronted with that kind of score back in 1908. So we've gone barless and we've had a collage of temporal planes. What else can we do with rhythm? Well, we can have cross rhythms. If you think of the world of jazz, it's all about syncopation. It's all about having a beep, dip, 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 and syncopation above that. Yeah. Classical composers drew more or less consciously on that, possibly not until later, not until after the 1920s. But that was just happening generally within their musical consciousness. And there are also cross rhythms aplenty in the world of African drums, and these kind of world musics were becoming more and more, I suppose, known within various musical cultural circles because there were these world exhibitions, and they would have been aware of these exotic new sounds such as these. Here we go. Oh. So we've got polyrhythm here, right? You've got the wood blocks going ding, 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 ding over the top. Underneath. You know. All joined together though by the same pulse. Yeah. So this is about playful syncopation and accents. And it's very groovy. Let's just think about what Prokofiev would do with that. So we're now looking at 1909, the Ives. Let me remind you, 1908. 1909, I'm going to turn to one of my favourite sonatas for piano by Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev. And this was written in 1909 and came out in 1912. All 4 of these movements are built up on motor rhythms. So you have this constant pulse over which there will be syncopations and accents. So let me just give you the first move in. I didn't play that very well, but you get up. There we go. Now underneath, this almost mechanical rhythm, and I think perhaps he was drawing on the world of industry that had developed so much around that time. You think of the world of Russian music, and you Mosolov and the Iron Foundry, which is a very direct depiction of a factory at work. It's very metallic and ching, 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 driving away. It's quite scary, actually, if you listen to that, the Iron Foundry. There's something very irrepressible. And over there, yeah, progressing above, and you got. It's quite aggressive, isn't it? And the young Prokofiev was known for not just quite provocative, aggressive rhythms and this overall tone to his language, but also sarcasm, and he was quite biting in his satire in music. We'll come back to a bit of satire of Prokofiev later in the third chapter to this. So the first movement goes between something that feels quite mechanistic and playfulness. And you'll find that is a pattern that's repeated throughout all four movements. And just in microcosm, maybe, we go to the second movement, we have this all the way through this quaver movement. It's relentless, really, really is. It's called a scherzo, but it has a malevolence to it. Again, set off by a middle section, which is more light-hearted and almost clown-like, poking fun. Third movement. I'm just speeding this up because we're running on in time now. So throughout you're going to get these couplets. Emotional sobs, but still a repetitive rhythm there, a motor rhythm of a kind. And the finale is just so delightful. Again, picking up on the movement of threes from the first movement, but now super fast. Did I have this here to play to you? If not, just listen for the finale of... here it is. I thought I did. Yefim Bronfman. He's quite good, isn't he? Now, this is actually a scherzo, and this gives you a sense, I think, of the very rigid rhythmic pulse. So thrilling, isn't it? Gosh, Yefim Bronfman. That's, what you can do if you practice really, really, really hard and have an abundance of talent. So, if that sounded anti-romantic to you and devoid of any gooey sentiment, that's exactly what Prokofiev was after. He wanted a new sort of objectivity to his style and to drive out any of that former sentiment. This had to feel fresh and forward-looking, and the way you did it was through, as I say, these driving rhythms. That said, with Prokofiev, you get this combination of a metallic rhythm and exquisitely twisting lyrical lines above it. That's what makes Prokofiev, in a nutshell, so beautiful to listen to. When he combines those two worlds. Where should we go from here? Well, we've reached 1909. The time has come, I believe, for Stravinsky. I've got to talk about the Rite of Spring, 1913, in a talk on modernism. And this just blows my mind, this score. Whenever I come back to it, pretty much every line of the score has something to say that is new and vitally new at that, either in terms of colour, instrumentation, but most of all in its rhythmic language. So if you go back to the world of those drums and how much polyrhythm there were, 3 different lines of rhythms being brought together, you get that in abundance in the Rite of Spring. And you get mixed meter, which is built in turn on additive rhythms. So let me just unpack that just briefly. Instead of having 1 2 1 2 1 2, he does, let's have 1 2 1 2 2 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 1 2, like that. So mixed meter and additive rhythms. That is a new way of thinking about rhythm. That isn't about evenly dividable rhythms, but instead 2s plus 3s. Just brought together into playful sequences like 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2. And I suppose the best example of that, or the most celebrated one, it comes in the final dance to the death, right at the end of this extraordinary ballet. And let's see if I can just sort of bring out the rhythmic language for you. Let me go into this. One I prepared earlier. It starts, by the way, this ballet with freedom and rhythmic freedom. Just a folk song that is whistled, and then slowly but surely we get the humans who come in with their non-organic, very much metrically informed rhythms, those stamping rhythms, which will be such an important feature of this ballet. Now then, I want to go to the end of this, so let's just do that. If my iPad will let me. Bear with. Yes, here we go. Right the way to the last sacrificial dance. Now, we've got 3/16 followed by 5/6, so 3 semiquavers in a bar, followed by 5/16, then another 3, then another 4, 5, 3, 4. You get the picture. And if I do it slowly, it sounds like this. So 1 2 3, pause. 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2. Yeah. It is a delight to actually crack that rhythmic code that his feet is. This particularly jittery rhythm later is all about the rests in between, right? And these fiery interruptions also that are all part of the unsettling language. It's a marvellous exploration of what rhythm can do, and it evokes worlds of tribal primitivism, not just through the additive rhythms, which are quite an African concept, but also through the colours. So you have massive amounts of percussion just piling in with exuberance, and the orchestra playing Hell for Leather, and that's just the sound. If you combine that with what was happening in the ballet and in the dance on stage, you've got a revolution. So I'm just going to finish this particular thread of rhythm by looking at the world of folk song and folk dance, because that was another really rich source for rhythmic invention and innovation. So if I, for example, play to you a Hungarian folk song or a folk tune here, it sounds like this. So there is a metric quality to the accompaniment. 1, 2, 1. But listen to how free that fiddle is above. If you combine that kind of melodic freedom and a sense of improvisation in the violin part with the speech rhythms of a folk song, then you get a completely new foundation on which to base your innovative rhythmic language. And Janacek, and after him Bartók, and a whole manner of composers actually looked at speech rhythm and folk dance as a way of bringing in a very nationalist imprint onto their music, in particular their rhythmic writing. So, for example, here is Bartók's Hungarian peasant song. Written in 1914. Great. Oh, I love that set. That and the dance suite, his early stuff, Béla Bartók, a Hungarian composer, is, I suppose, more accessible, but still does great things with the rhythms in order to bring in that folk DNA into a classical contemporary world, or contemporary for their time. So do listen to those. We've come to the third and final chapter now. And having explored colour and harmony and rhythm, we're now just going to look at the issue of style. And this is really about reinventing the past, which is what, it's a typical modernist trait, right? To look back at the traditions of before and reinvent them in a way that either pokes fun at them, parodies them, or is, I say, more in homage to them, and yet using them as a platform for your own inimitable, unique voice. I'm going to look to Maurice Ravel, first of all, for a work of neo-Baroque style. And this is the Tombeau de Couperin. Tombeau, in this sense, being something in memory of, literally meaning a tomb, and Couperin being Couperin le Grand, Couperin the Great, this harpsichord composer from the French Baroque period. And what Ravel is so effectively doing in this particular piece is he's evoking the Baroque past, but putting in some pungent harmonies and little sort of winking gestures that say, actually, no, this is a forward-looking modern piece that is very knowingly drawing on previous models. Actually, it's particularly touching, this suite, because every single movement is dedicated to a soldier that had fallen in the First World War. So this was actually written in 1917, initially for piano, but then he did an orchestral version a couple of years later. And it's that I'm going to play to you now. This is the Foulane, which, confusingly, is not a French dance, but actually an Italian one. And it's in a lilting 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just listen to the harmonic ingenuity, though, at play here. It's got all the transparency there of the Baroque style. You can hear absolutely everything within that texture, can't you? So beautifully balanced and so graceful, and yet little piquant touches there, little bits of spice in terms of the harmony. Around about the same time, and this is the final piece for this particular, shall I call it a lecture? That sounds quite grand, doesn't it? But yes, for this talk, is Prokofiev's Classical Symphony. For Prokofiev, he said it was just a passing phase, this, and as the title suggests, it's a famous bit of neoclassicism for him, so re-exploring the world of Mozart symphonies, in particular the witty quality to them and that slightly impish quality that we sometimes get with Mozart. About the finale, Prokofiev wrote that I was hugging myself with delight at the time I was composing it. He was really, really pleased with what he'd done with this finale, and it cost him a bit of time and sweat because he had to rewrite it. He jettisoned one version of it and came up with the version that we now know. I go directly to this finale because it is such a fun curtain closer for this particular symphony, and you can hear immediately this classical likeness, but at the same time a modern aesthetic that is driving it as well. Isn't that great? Every time I come back to this piece, I just love it. You know, one hears it a lot, precisely because it is so appealing. But as a piece of neoclassicism that predates, in fact, similar experiments by Stravinsky and others, it is exemplary. You know, it captures the spirit of Mozart while feeling fresh. You know, and eternally fresh in a way. You know, it feels like a fizzy glass of champagne. And with that image, I say to you, cheers, and thank you for sticking with me this far. I hope you have. I hope you've enjoyed the many faces of modernism. We've gone, haven't we, from the world of Tristan and Isolde and then erotic forms right the way through to the mechanical but joyful world of Prokofiev. So happy listening when you do explore those works for yourselves. There is a playlist actually that will be posted on the website alongside this talk, but I will be coming back soon to explore actually the Baroque period, so I'm going to jump back in time to the 17th century. Until then, I hope you keep safe and well, and thank you so much for joining me.